And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here, where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever, and today we're talking about bungee jumping with vines and culturally accepted ear hoops that may not be a good idea 20 years from now. Or we could talk about shader math. I don't know. Which one do you guys think we should do?
I'm going to go with the shaders.
You're going to go with the shaders? All right. Joining us today is Ed Marina from RoamingGamer.com.
Hey,
also joining is Stephen Johnson from Xibalba Studios.com. See how
I got it right that time.
I almost got it right. You know what? I'm going to kind of chalk that up to Google Hangout fuzz. So we're here with Studios, and
that's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. That's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. Hey, so do you guys have any announcements or anything you want to talk about before we get into the show?
Small announcement, and then I'm just going to shut up because I took over the whole show last time. I did finally start my Patreon. It's out there.
Yay!
Yay! It's
Awesome.
offering rewards that are not quite yet ready to go. I'm still working on finishing up the rewards, but they will be there for those who want to participate in the Patreon this month.
Oh, sweet. And you're going to send me a link to that, right?
I'm going to do that. I'll drop it in the thing, but I'll send you an email too.
Okay, yeah, we'll have full details on that. I think and let's talk about it on next Tuesday, or not tomorrow. Tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. We are going to have our 5th Corona Geek After Dark Hangout, where we get together and just talk about app development, community insights, forum topics, general geekery is what I like to call it. So we'll talk about that then there, because I know we definitely have been goading you, I think is a good word,
I think that's
about this whole Patreon thing. Yeah. Sweet.
Sergey's here.
Sergey's here. Can I add him to the broadcast? Hold on just a second.
Not pistachios.
There we go. Hey, Sergey. You're on mute, just FYI.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Sergey.
I was wondering why I'm black on the screen, and I thought this is a problem with my camera, but turns out this is a new feature of Hangouts.
Yeah, well, we've activated the cameraman feature so that we can add people to the broadcast as they come in. That way, nobody can do anything that they shouldn't be doing.
Pistachios.
Yeah. So, okay, well, cool. We'll have a link to that in the show notes then, and that'll be exciting to talk about. And so, Stephen, what about you? You got anything going on?
Nothing new.
Nothing new? Same old, same old?
That's it.
And Sergey, got any news? Anything? Going to conferences? Releasing apps? Got anything to share?
I'm joining a startup for marketing and like coupons, where people show their coupon on somewhere and they can use it somewhere else. And I'm working on the awesome plugins for Corona. It still takes a lot of time. I thought it would be faster.
Okay, cool. Just coupons.
Pure or I can't think of the word. Native.
Lua? What? Oh, pure native.
I'm sorry, Lua or native?
Plugins, native plugins.
Native. Oh, yeah, you're the man. See, you hurt my feelings.
I'm sorry.
No, you just make it feel small because I'm afraid of the native.
Are you, Sergey?
I'm also afraid.
Are you focusing on a particular platform like iOS or Android, or are you trying to make it cross-platform?
Plugins.
I know,
Yeah,
but
plugins, so yeah, I'm targeting both platforms, iOS and Android. But there's one plugin would be only. Some plugins would be Android only because they don't make much sense on iOS, for example.
Right. Okay. Cool. Well, yeah. Let us know when they're. Well, we'll probably let everybody know, but I mean, give us when you've submitted. Let us know, and we'll
sure
talk more about it. All right. Well, let's get into 2D math, because I know we have a lot to talk about, and I say we. So I know Stephen has a lot to talk about. I'm going to listen intently. But I also wanted to ask, do you plan to cover anything on 2D shadows? Because I know that was a topic of discussion in the forums.
I might, if I have time at the end, I guess, or I could do it right up front.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I don't want to, I was just curious. So just give everybody a kind of an insight as to what we're going to do, so they stick around if which pieces they want. Okay, well let's get into 2D math and talk about that aspect of things.
Okay, so in a previous show, I showed the little heat haze example where it was shimmering back and forth, and if you let it run for a while, it would start getting choppy. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that first, and then I'll go into just playing with some math equations after that.
So this is kind of an expansion of the topic of precision. I think we covered
Right.
or touched on several times.
Yep.
Okay.
So if I and we see here on the reference card for OpenGLES that there's several precisions available.
Hold on. Is everybody seeing this desktop?
Are you
Not
seeing
seeing your
it?
desktop. Seeing your
seeing
face
it.
still.
Say again?
We're still seeing your camera.
Oh, let's
Are
see.
you showing the desktop?
I didn't hit share. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Now we see it, right?
Roger, rabbit.
Yeah, but we see the Hangout.
You still see the Hangout?
Okay, there it is. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's some kinks that need to be worked out of this process. So there's these precisions available in OpenGLES, high, medium, and low. And high might be available, or it might not, in the fragment shader. It will always be there in the vertex shader, but not necessarily in the fragment shader. And below that, there are some numbers with some terms that, if you'd just seen them, you might not know exactly what they're talking about. So relative to the negative 16, relative to the negative 10, absolute to the negative 8. And what those are talking about involve the way numbers are represented in floating point. And they follow, are we seeing this picture?
Seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay. So in floating point, under the hood it's a bunch of bits. There's a sign bit, there's some exponent bits, and there's some mantissa bits, or they're sometimes called significand bits. And a number is implemented as a sign, so positive or negative, times something 1 plus a fraction. And this could go from 0 to, in this case, 1023. And that corresponds to relative to the negative 10. To the negative 10 is 1 over 1024 times the next power of 2. So this will go from 0 to almost the next power of 2 over 1024 times the power of 2. And we go from the lowest implemented power of 2, so in this case, to the negative 14, which is quite a small number, to 2 to the 14, which is 16 times 1024, so 16,384. And the thing about this is that as you go up in powers of 2, you still have 1024 elements between. And this is great when you're at very low numbers, like 1 to 2. There's 1024 values between those. That's pretty precise. Or that you can probably land on the numbers you want. But as you get bigger or larger, say you're between 2 to the 8th, so 256, and 512, suddenly spaces of 1,024th of that distance become, 0.5. So you can only represent every 0.5 between those. And once you get between 1,024 and 2,048, suddenly you can only represent every 1, so every integer between those, and you have no fraction anymore. And so on all the way up. Now you start after this area, you'll start skipping 2 at a time and 4 at a time until you run out of numbers. And so you can see that as you get higher and higher up in your number values, you'll start rounding to bigger and bigger larger and larger numbers, and you get choppy at that point, because even when you're interpolating between them, you're getting snapped to one integer or another.
So what do you do to compensate for that, I guess, is the question I'm thinking of.
Well, if you can scale the number back down, you can shrink it, by dividing by a large number, you might be able to mitigate the effects that way. So if you're multiplying by a small fraction, sometimes that'll be okay. If you're the one generating the numbers, then you might be able to break it apart and like apply the mod operator to shrink it before you multiply it out. But if the number is coming from somewhere else, like the time in Corona, which is just incrementing continuously, then suddenly you've got issues.
Okay.
And one way to avoid that would be to just pass in your own time value, but then you lose an input, and you only have 3 inputs left after that. And so if anybody has not seen those previous shows where I demonstrated the problem, I'll run a little demo for that.
Yeah. Give us a kind of an example of this, because conceptually I can understand what you're saying, but it would be good to see it in action.
Right. So I think I'll show this one first. So this is what I was showing before, where the heat haze would vary with time, and I'm passing in time as an input. And we see the time goes from 0 to 1024, and it's okay up until about here. So as it's crossing from 700 to 800. And if we look at the code for that, the initial values, I have the time multiplied by 1.3 and by pi because it's an angle. And then pi times 1.3 is slightly over 8. So that's slightly over a power of 2. And then it's being multiplied by 800 right around this spot. So I think that's consistent with it going just over 1024 times 8. So it looks like my card starts to get flaky, or sine, because sine is being used to compute the curve somewhere here. Yeah, the sine of the angle. So this is basically consistent with these numbers losing precision as you go up, and it might be a couple of things. It could be that one number is on one side of the curve, the other is like say if you were trying to smoothly go over a hill, but you didn't have very well spaced points, so your hill might abruptly.
So
I don't know if that's very clear what I'm saying, but
yeah, I see what you're saying, because you want a smooth transition. You want like almost a wave, I guess. But what you're saying is that because that math then begins to jump in quantity, that also visually that the image begins to jump and begins to jitter or create gaps, and that's not as smooth as you want it to be.
Right. So rather than the kind of undulating hills that sine would generate, at this point it breaks up, and
Yeah, that's definitely something you have to visually represent in order to get it right, because because as we're looking at the math, the drawing that you had before, we're like, okay, well here's the math, here's how it grows, and then here's how it begins to grow sort of exponentially, and you're like, okay, well I can grasp all that, but it's not until you actually see the image, see it applied to an image, that you're like, oh, okay, well this is now creating jagged edges, and that's not my intention. So.
And this is a different one with just the color, which is also using a sine wave. And there's some, it might not show up the problem on some of these, but I think here, do you see this discontinuity?
Yeah, it becomes like these green and orange stripes. Right,
and they're not as smooth.
Yeah.
And that occurs right around the same time as it did in the other picture.
Right, so they're kind of uniform all the way up to the end, and then they start to kind of break up and split.
Yeah, so the precision isn't adequate at that point.
And then, now, is that something that? I mean, how do you? I guess going back to the compensation question, how do you compensate for that if you know that that's coming? I mean, what do you? Did you just chop off the end of the ham there and say, okay, well, I'm not going to show you. It's not, I'm not going to show you this part, or is it? Even if your image is smaller, it's still going to continue to be a problem.
That might work. It again depends on how you're receiving your input. You might just be passing the buck on, and then you'll run into it a little bit later.
Is this a shader? I guess a generalized shader issue, or is this something specific to that occurs in Corona, or what?
It's general with floating point, but the range in a double precision is you have 2 to the 52 values that you can put in that, which is in the quadrillions.
Okay.
So in practice, you'd have to be doing something pretty crazy to run into it. You could increment that by 1 every second, and you would go for thousands of years. For instance, you could be doing it hundreds of times per second and do the same thing. So you'd have to be doing massive multiplications. So it's not really an issue in Corona.
Well, which I am actually, and that shows clearly the problem I encountered with my water shader, because it's a value that increments every frame, and I scale it up by quite a large amount to get different sine and cosine values. And I think sine and cosine is probably the best way of showing it, because we all know what to expect. So this is really useful. But what I didn't really, I mean, you tried to explain it beforehand, I remember this, but the imprecision value was actually so low. I mean, that is actually quite a low maximum value. So there's no surprise. I think a lot of people can hit that value fairly easily.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, this is great stuff.
And if you don't have high precision, or you're not doing it in the vertex shader, the number 1024, if you break that up into seconds, that's only about 17 minutes. And I think if you have high precision, it's 21 hours or something like that. So
I think the thing is, we can't rely on having high precision. Is this correct? We can, graphics cards.
It's a hardware thing, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So realistically, to be safe, we need to work to medium precision. Is that a fair comment?
If you're doing it in the vertex shader, if you can move it there, then you would have high precision available. But if you have to do it in the fragment shader, it depends if you're willing to cut off that part of the market, I guess, or. Otherwise, you'll have to accommodate both.
Okay, I think that there are probably solutions, for most of our applications, keeping them within medium precision, but it means basically for me that if you're doing any fragment shaders or anything, it's just not even worth looking at high precision because you can't guarantee that a device will have it.
And for instance, with the sine function, if you can't really do that in the vertex shader because if you need to interpolate it, it's not a linear function, so it won't interpolate the way you would like it to. So you could interpolate the angle, and maybe that would work. But if you were doing significant amounts of the computation, you couldn't do that in the vertex shader because it's no longer linear. And
yeah, definitely.
There is a function available in GLES called, where is it? Okay, get shader precision format. So currently, I haven't seen that this is exposed in Corona, but it could pretty easily be done in system.getInfo, I think. And this will give you some numbers back that will tell you how much range you actually have. Like these numbers are the minimum required to be a conforming GL implementation, but they can be higher. So Corona could pretty easily expose this, and then you could ask up front, do I have this feature? And you could use some of those things I've mentioned before where you adapt your shader, you inject the code that's appropriate to whatever you have. But at the moment, you would have to go into native to get that. Any questions on that?
So did I track the conversation? It was tied to the graphics card. Did you say? Yeah.
These will be fixed for your particular graphics card and maybe your driver, but.
So really, then when we're talking about specifically Android devices, I guess is what my mind jumps to, because you never know what the manufacturer is going to do. So I think that this would become a real big issue in the Android land.
I've been shopping around for a better Android device, and it's never spelled out exactly whether they have this. And I don't really want the device for all this fanciness. I just want it to test on it. So
I'm pretty sure the one I suggested has that. But
yeah, I think so. So
I'm going to say that being the very latest generation from them probably has it. I suggested he get the Nexus 10 if he wanted something powerful in the Android market.
But how would you do that if you wanted to compensate for least common denominator then? I mean, what are we really... You either have to pick a device and say this is what it's supported for, right, and then be very specific about that. What's that?
I might have the least common denominators. I got them. They were Google giveaways for developers events.
What do you have? What are you working off of?
I'm using a Zoom, so it's fairly old at this point. It doesn't have high precision.
And what you're wanting to do runs on it?
Yeah. I actually, maybe I should get into this point too, that I brought up that you only have 4 inputs to your shaders, right? And that's actually an artificial limit because there is another way, but Corona hasn't documented it yet. So if you go through a different channel, and they said they wanted to clean it up, so they haven't exposed it yet. This is the uniform user data, and that you can get up to 64 inputs, I guess, but they can't do certain optimizations. So right now, what we have available is 4, or if you can sneak it through a texture, there's that, but that's more difficult. But often for one of these inputs, you won't need the full range for one input, so you can possibly squeeze two of them together, right? This would be like in an integer, you could take half of it for one integer, half of it for the other. If you had a 32-bit integer, 16 bits for one, 16 for another. And what I've been doing is squeezing. Well, the application I've been using it for is a number between 0 and 1. You can squeeze two of those together if they could be scaled to integers between 0 and 1023.
So let me make sure I'm tracking the conversation correctly. So you're saying that left by itself, one I don't even know what the term is, but one object might scale to the point where the math gets sideways, let's just say. But if you know that you can break that up into two or more items, then you can mitigate some of the exponential growth, the floating point issues or whatever, and then you can just work with those multiple objects to create the same effect, but know that under the hood you're working with multiple objects as opposed to just one object.
Oh, well.
That's sort of like what you're saying?
Nope. I was actually bringing in another point that would dovetail with what I
Okay.
So the problem I'm talking about is that we only have 4 inputs to a shader, and that's not always enough. So I think if you didn't need the color, you could probably sneak things in through the color, but I haven't experimented with that yet. But if you need more of this, and you can make the data fit this style of fit these ranges, maybe you can squeeze them in. And before what I had was where I had the integer part represented one value. So if I had x and y together, the x would be in the integer, and then the floating point part would be y. But because of this problem, when I got up into the high numbers, I lost most of y. When I got way up there, it was only 0.5 between the numbers, which is nothing like what I gave it to begin with, right? It's getting rounded to these power of 2 boundaries. So what I ended up doing was, because I've been reading up and reminding myself on all this floating point stuff, is to use the knowledge of how it's implemented and pack the number that way. And I actually need some testing of this on some other devices. I've only tested it on Android and Windows, and I had to do some special stuff on Android because.
So have you yet to test it on a high precision case or a?
I need to test it on. Well, I need to test it on everything Apple, iOS, and Apple itself, and.
Well, feel free to send me a.
High precision Android.
Send me a copy. I've got a iPad, the third one, so. Yeah. I believe it's the AX8 or whatever it is. I can't remember the name for the processor, whatever.
Yeah, and I have the original. I have the original iPad, and I also have a iPad Mini first gen. So. Okay. We could.
Yeah, we're on board helping.
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah, of course. So we got to go through the whole process with the thing. Do you want us to send you our UDIDs?
I'll figure that out.
Figure it out later. Okay, not for the show. Sorry.
This is the magic anyway. This is doing all of that stuff I've mentioned, and I'll show you one that is my. I think this is currently my shader that requires the most input. It requires 7 inputs, so it's an ice effect. Is that visible? Yes.
Yeah, we see it now.
Okay.
The angel looks like it's turning into an ice.
Yeah.
Sculpture.
So it's got 3. This is how much the ice bends light data. This is the brightness of this light that's around here. And the light position is 2 inputs, and it's an X and Y. So those I needed to pack together because I was running, I have 7 things here. So these 3 and 2 values for each point. And the I is where this background texture is looking. And so that's 6, or that's 5, I guess. And then these 2 have to be packed together too. So they all fit into 4 inputs at that point. And you get something very non-ice-like or something in that range. But this is the brightness.
So what you've done is you've taken those 4 inputs that you were talking about earlier, and you've done what to them in order to make this?
So the light and the position are all just 0 positions between 0 and 1. So left is 0, right is 1, and ditto for up and down. So I packed those 2 together into a number that's, because I knew that I could scale these ranges to 1024, and it would be fine for me. For a larger screen, I think you'd have to make a new packing scheme. But I haven't done that, and I don't have anything really to run through its paces. But these numbers, they're within 2 to the 20, so 2 to the 10 times 2 to the 10, which is 1024 times 1024. It's a little over 1 million. I can cram those into the floating point representation, and they seem to work out. But barring failures I discover on these tests. So this is a way of, rather than going through the naive scheme I did before where I was just passing it through the fraction. And what would happen would be if I had something way over on this side, so all the way over here, the integer part would be very big, very large, and then the y part would just disappear, so it would snap to the top or the bottom, the light or the I position. So
Barry's over there feverishly working on his code based on the stuff that you said. He's like trying to make his water work. So.
Yeah, and it's tricky because of course on the laptop it looks fine. It only goes wrong on the device, so I'm having to do some frustrating live updating to see if it works. But I think you've probably showed me the way. Definitely.
Yeah, I can point you to
enough to show the results live. Let's put it like that.
Right. Yeah, I can point you to all this stuff that I've done for it. So.
Now, Stephen, I know Corona's got an open beta for desktop and stuff, right? So, is this going to be more of a conversation as people develop more and more desktop apps? You think?
Well, the same analysis for the floating point applies. It then depends on what it's using to behind the scenes. For if it's trying to emulate the mobile and us using this rather tight precision, then it would be more of an issue if it was just saying use the desktop part, and then you got a much more wide open space, and you won't run into these as quickly. You'll eventually run into them if you get really large numbers, but it's this. There's some things that they're not guaranteed to implement, but like infinity and numbers that don't exist. But otherwise, it's basically a floating point number as you would find on the desktop.
And let me ask: is this also something that, like I saw in Barry's comments here in the chat, he's saying that his water shader goes wrong in under 5 minutes. So is this something that, knowing that you could like you could instantiate or create something and then kill it and then bring it up, but like kind of cycle through in order to compensate?
I think Barry, you're using the time, right? Or you were at some point?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm passing in a time parameter, but the thing is, I scale it up a lot. That's why it goes wrong so quickly, I think. What I'm trying to do now is finding values that I can modulate, find the modulus a lot lower. What I was doing, because the thing for a water effect, a reasonably natural water effect, I want to have sine and cosine values that don't fall into psych. They're not in the same phase, or they're not the same wavelength a lot. And the problem is I've got like 3 or 4 for x values and 3 or 4 for y values. I need to find a value where they all do actually end up ultimately in sync within these values. So, and that still looks reasonably random. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. If I can find those values, it should be fine. It should be fine. Knowing the limit was part of the thing, and I honestly didn't realise it was so low for medium precision.
So you, as long as you know that you can just bump it right up against the edge of something and not go over that, then everything would be fine.
Yeah. It's like you were saying about the lowest common denominator. I mean, all I will do from now on is I just will never assume anything higher than a medium precision float. And then knowing that, you can plan accordingly. It's just I didn't do that, so sort of retrofitting it now is, and trying to make it look nice is a little bit trickier. Plus, I keep finding more and more sine and cosine values scaled up in my code. The shape is quite long.
Yeah, the sine is at least convenient in that it's periodic, so you can do the mod. You can cut the values down to a range, and you can use some modular arithmetic and all this. But with some functions, it's what do? You know, there's no repeating pattern or whatever to take advantage of. And this is why I mentioned before that it would be nice to be able to reset the time, so that it isn't in the area where you have to think about this constantly, where you might be able to, like, between your levels, reset it or whatever.
But then, I mean, this is when we talked about this earlier. This was one of the first things that occurred to me. So I'm passing it in as a parameter, and my time parameter does wrap. So it just means sort of every 15 minutes in my game, the water jerks because I'm looping the value. I haven't found a decent wrapping point. But yeah, I mean, the time value just going up continuously is going to probably cause a problem with a lot of things. Okay, it may take 20 hours or something, and we hope no one is that obsessed. But it's definitely something to look at.
Yeah, well, I mean, the 20 hours thing that would just be if you were only using the time, but it could happen faster if you're scaling it. So, so it's just good to keep this in mind for whatever situation might come up. And, that's what I have on numbers. I could move it to the math effects at this point, if there's no other questions.
I got a quick question.
Okay.
Can you calculate logarithms in Shader?
Yep. Yeah, there's log base 2, and I think there's at least log base 2. There might be log 10, I don't. Yeah, there's natural log and then log base 2.
Okay. Just a random question.
Okay. Yeah, there's
nothing coming out of that. Feel free to proceed.
Okay.
Half-formed thought, sorry.
Just a random, hey, can you microwave popcorn with this thing?
That was my next question. It's not the night show, so I can't use the appropriate words to describe that comment.
Yeah.
But it starts with smart. Let me just say that. Okay, go ahead, Steven. Sorry.
So I'm going to discuss this. You seeing this?
Roger, Roger.
Okay, so this is a laser effect I've been playing around with. And under the hood, this is a rect that is anchored at one of its side points and spinning around. And there's a few things going on. You can see the wave pattern along the boundary. I don't know if if it shows up, but it's especially bright in the center, and there's a little bit of noise applied to the beam in the center, so there's white leaking off into the blue. Is that visible, or?
Yeah, we can see that.
All right. And okay, so I'm using a noise function from ShaderToy called IQ noise. I guess it's the guy's initials. And I had to tame this because the numbers were in 43,758, and it was doing what I'd said before. That's very close to the limit, even with high precision, that kind of gets to the boundaries. So I just moved the decimal point over. And I'm using that to calculate the noise both on the boundary and inside. The noise, and a recap, noise is coherent randomness. So it's a number that you take two nearby values, the noise will be close to it, the same value. And it's reproducible, so if you pass in the same inputs, you get the same noise value back. And it's between -1 and 1. So I can use it to displace up and down. And this is the shader itself. I am using I'm just assuming a say again? No. I'm just assuming a rectangle that's facing right to left. So x is on the left, or from left to right, and y is from bottom to top. Sorry. And the values are in 0, 1, and it's angle independent. The texture coordinates don't care about the angle where our rectangle is oriented at. So the center going down the length of the beam is increasing on the x, and the other way is increasing on the y. And I'm using a lot of functions in here like exponential. I've got a sign in here somewhere. I thought I did. Got this, which gives you -1, 0, or 1, depending on the sign of the value. I have pow, and I'm going to show a shader I got here. So this is what is this? Function 3. So this is x to the y. So this is the pow function. And going from x0 to x1, you see it's kind of flat early on, and it goes up really quickly, right? And I'm using that in this to basically detect the ratio of our noise-based height to the pixel position. So the height of the pixel from the center. I get a scale factor, and this may be less than 1, 1, or greater than 1. This ratio. And I'm subtracting it from 1 so that way the ratio will be close to 0 in the center, and as you go out, it'll get larger and larger until it's over 1. And I'm using it to calculate the white value. So it's slightly different from a square root because it's taking the power to the slightly less than 0.5 power. And I believe I don't think I used those same values in here, but this is demonstrating the way a power function behaves. If you're under 1, like if you take 0.2 times 0.2, you'll get. Sorry, if you take the square root of 0.2, you'll get a bigger number back, a larger number back, because you had to multiply a larger number by itself, but they're both under 1, so they would shrink, right? And when you hit 1, if you take the power of it, you'll get 1 back. If you go over 1, you'll start going up really quickly. So what that does is the white stays pretty bright near the center, and it gradually fades off until it hits an even ratio between the y value and the height, and then it drops off abruptly, and the other color takes over. Does that make sense, or should I explain anything else?
I don't know about anybody else, but yeah, I mean, conceptually it makes sense.
I love Charles's answers. Yeah.
Well, you know, I get the concept. I mean,
I know what you're really doing over there, Charles.
What's
you're
that?
Doing like sine, cosine, and your head you go sine, cosine.
Yeah, I'm doing it all in my head.
Oh, there's the inflection point. Okay, yeah, I got it.
The inflection point.
Exactly.
So I do have. I'm not using the logarithm, but I had it as an example. Let's see if I can. This is the binary logarithm.
I tell you, by the way, I love being able to visualize these things, because that kind of helps. You're right, a visual representation of what is actually happening. Because when the thing's moving, you're like, oh, that's a cool effect.
But it's hard to track it with the mouse.
Right. See how it's waving right here.
So this is a logarithm like what Ed brought up. It's at this is actually at 1, because at 0 it breaks. The logarithm isn't defined at 0, but this is 1 plus x, and it kind of ramps up and then it levels off very quickly. And this binary logarithm is if we're taking powers of 2, it's how many times you had to loop to get that power. So early on, say you had 16, you would have to take 1 and multiply it by 2 4 times. As you get to 1 million, you have to do it 20 times. So it doesn't grow that fast. It levels off quite a bit after this. And I could probably show that, but I'd be screwing with numbers and I might mess it up while I'm doing it. Sine is... I have my cheat sheet of which numbers looked decent.
I was going to ask you that before. Is there like a cheat sheet? Is there a place where somebody's already figured out, you know, these numbers and said, or you just have to kind of do this all on your own?
Well, this is a pretty special purpose shader, but you could find examples of the numbers computed at. There's all kinds of tables for this, because when we didn't have calculators, all the engineers wrote these giant books filled with these numbers.
Right.
Yeah, oh, what is that number? I got to go look it up. And especially the logarithms. All the astronomers were making these giant books.
So you could get yourself one of those books, right? I mean, is that what you're saying?
There's tables of numbers.
Yeah. Okay.
And let's see. So Barry was discussing the phase. This is the y value. We can see what that looks like as you move it. You see the sign is moving. It's kind of moving slowly, but. And we've got number of periods. So this, you can do this to contract it, or to go the other way. This is the offset. So this is the height. I guess I should have called that amplitude. But
amplitude, yeah.
So there's quite a bit of variability with sine, and because it's so regular, that's one of the things I mentioned, that you're getting basically the same function just shifted as you move. So you can mod the numbers and and still get the same results. So you mod by 2 pi, but your input might still go wild.
Because you're getting a repeating pattern. Is that what you're saying? I mean, you've got like from the lowest peak to the highest peak is pretty much the pattern, and then it repeats itself, sort of inversely, I guess you could say, or from lower peak to lower peak if you wanted to do it that way, and then it just.
Yeah, they sometimes call these troughs and peaks. Oh, and the inflection points are here, Ed. Because never mind. So, and exponential is the last one I have.
Wow, what happened there?
Oh, it was still feeding the input to sine, but they were meant for this. So exponential with and you see here I just had a bunch of these.
We can see.
Okay, so exponential with a negative exponent, with a positive exponent, it just shoots off into the sky. But with a negative exponent, it decays pretty quickly, right? So what were these? So if I increase this, that's not very evident. Okay. So you can make it sharper by scaling it because you're bringing the result of the exponential down. That was scaling the input. What I just did. Let's see if I do 30, it's like that. 50, it's like that. So as the input gets larger, because you're using a larger number times a negative exponent, exponential will go down like so.
See, it also takes a much larger number to make it. The closer it gets, the tighter it gets. It seems like it takes a much larger number in order to make it move. Whereas from 10 to 50 was a pretty big jump, but from 50 to 100 is a.
That's just one. So.
Yeah. Wow.
And what's this next number? Output scale factor. So this will increase the height a little bit. And you see it here. It's not exactly at 1. It crosses the y-axis or somewhere up there. And the last one was the y-offset. So this is 0.6. So that just shifts it up a little bit. And in the laser, I'm using that to interpolate between bright white at the center, so slightly more than 1 value. Like in Corona, you pass 1, 1, 1 for white, right? And I'm starting from a number that might be more than 1, so it's very bright, and interpolating it with the fill color. So it's just white, color scaled by the fill color. And I'm interpolating between that bright white and the fill color using this kind of curve. So it starts out very bright and then quickly goes down to the fill color. So we see that also in here.
Were you just interested in this effect in general, or were you working on it for a specific purpose?
I am using it for
something you can't talk about?
Like I could, I just don't know if I can.
It looks like a lightsaber.
Yeah, I realized that. I was trying to think how I could kind of make it like the guy was swinging it around, but I'll just get distracted, and who knows how long I'll take doing that. I'm using it for a laser effect, and I'll see if I can show that really quickly.
Is like a shooting laser, or like a laser weapon, or like a handheld laser weapon?
Okay.
Almost like
So here we have our little squirrel, and there's a UFO flying around. This guy goes around 5 times or so. I didn't tune it. I guess he's quick. So there we go. So that's the effect right now.
He's just lasering the crap out of that squirrel.
That is some massive overkill.
Yeah.
Star Wars versus the local squirrel.
Yeah.
Squirrel's still standing.
And
He says, "Bring it."
Squirrel kebabs are up next.
and I was doing that before with just a couple of rects and using additive blending and everything, but why not make an effect?
That's much more fun.
Yeah.
So now the next custom shader effect is the flying fur effect.
Again?
Fur is expensive.
Fur is expensive.
The way it's typically done is sending a lot of rays into a mesh and like 20 or 100 rays, and then figuring out all the interactions.
Your comment, sir.
Recording it at 1 frame per second and then upping it later when you play it back.
You could save the images, and use them, which I may investigate. But yeah, fur itself is expensive.
I see that you have done research in this area.
Well, the hand gestures really helped out there. That was really making it clear for me.
You should see me doing geometry stuff. We're this far along the axis and this far.
I just want to ask everybody out here, 4th episode, I don't know, maybe I'm late in the game here, but are you guys having like flashbacks of high school as we go here, where we're talking about like math and you're like, I feel like I'm sitting at my desk again?
Yeah. Steve blew my mind just a moment ago when he said when you multiply two decimal numbers together or whatever, that they get smaller. The answer gets smaller. And I was like, what does it? I was like,
it's been a long time since I had to think about that.
I've never thought of that before. I guess that's true. Never really thought about it, because you always multiply something by something, it just gets bigger. But I was like,
conundrums high schoolers are
like, what? Mind blown.
Right. Should I go into the shadows, or?
No, I don't think we're gonna have time.
I'll
show it.
Show it. Yeah, but show it. Preview it for next time.
This will probably be something really quick I could do next time when we do it, but.
Cool.
Oh. So there we go.
Yeah, and is this related to the forum discussion itself, or is this something just you want to work on in general?
I played with it a little bit because some of the stuff you wouldn't necessarily need a multicast to do this, but that's why I added some coloring of the shadow, and this is using Matt Webster's shadow example from the code exchange, and I ran with it a little bit.
And just for people like myself who don't know exactly what I'm looking at, what's happening there?
It's doing a. Put that back on.
I know. I waited until you took it off the screen.
It's doing a Gaussian blur on some objects. So there's a black object that's slightly wider and this image, and with that we make a shadow. Then in addition to that, we had another pass to mess with the shadow itself, so adding color and everything. And what this thing is a light source, and it's adjusting the angle of this shadow according to the angle of the light source.
Okay.
It's coming through more like a glow on the video for me.
It is, and it changes from yellow to green for me.
Oh, that was just me playing with the effect.
Right.
It's originally black.
But I can see that the color, the shading or whatever, moves opposite of whatever the light source is. So I'm assuming the shadow is moving away from, in the opposite direction of the light source, and then you were applying color to it. So, but at first glance, I was like, I don't know what's going on there.
I mean, just shifting that angle isn't probably not enough to justify a multicast, but it's an example. It shows what's going on. So
Steven, how's performance on device? Because Gaussian blur is pretty expensive.
It is. It's already 2 pass, and then there's a 3rd pass with this thing.
So have you run it on a device or a reasonably older device?
It doesn't do well.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Have you run like to see what it drops in terms of frames, or is it just feel bad?
I haven't measured it, but yeah, I've definitely noticed that. And Renee chimed in a thread and said, yeah, it's slow. So I don't know. I haven't seen it on a newer one, but I guess you guys are saying it's still that way? Or? If so, I might have some guesses, but that's speculation.
Yeah. I mean, I would say you can do a Gaussian blur on like a latest generation iOS device, but even then, I mean, you're gonna proceed with caution for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's other things to discuss in multipass itself. So it's just a way to give an example.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about that offline then. We'll work out the details around that discussion and bring some examples and stuff. That'd be cool. I think that'd be a good conversation. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I've learned a lot today. I don't know that I could actually go out and do it by myself without some sort of hand-holding or serious focus, but I at least am furthered along in my understanding. I mean, when we started doing the whole conversation about shaders, I got I'd say 1% of the conversation, and now I feel like I'm at least 2.5, 3%. At least 10% of the conversation now. I'm like I got it. I'm good.
At this point, we have repetition from earlier.
Yeah, you've done a great job of tying them all, stitching them all together, because that helps. That definitely helps. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you haven't watched these shows previously, you definitely need to go to youtube.com/coronageek and check out the previous sessions that we've had. I mean, this is 153, so we've had four or five sessions now, like you said, Ed. So we've got, if you go back, 4 or 5, maybe 6 shows, you can definitely see where we picked up on the conversation and start from there. So, all right, guys. Well, that's it for the day, I guess. Be back here next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific to talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. Until then, have a great week. Happy coding.
Adios.
Bye.